Good morning, everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. For those of you who don't know me already, my name is Daniel Pino, and I'm a longtime MS Access MVP. Today, I wanted to talk about an article that I've recently completely revamped on my website, my blog, which is determining the OS Bitness. Now, some of you are going, why? Well, I actually came into needing this myself, and this is why it's been rewritten, because I wanted to make it more thorough, and I was trying to find the most efficient way to determine this for some things I'm doing in PowerShell, actually. I recently came across a major hurdle when I tried to do my most recent article. Here we go, dev hut. Okay. Sorry about that. My most recent article here, it will eventually load, about creating Windows pop-ups. Long story short, and wow, is it slow today. This, my VM, I don't know why, it's horrifically slow at doing pretty much anything, and I just can't figure out why. But if you come down at a certain point, when we get into the burnt toast, the advanced stuff, I had originally this standard code, standard notification, and if you look, I required a helper function because I couldn't get a certain section of code to work, this guy here. And it kept saying the module wasn't installed and all sorts of weird stuff. I couldn't figure it out. Now, I've had a long back and forth and eventually managed to figure out, with the help of some other people, the issue has to do with the code. So let's look at what I'm trying to resolve, and then we'll get into how we determine the bitness. So I'm just going to open up my database. This is the database where I've tested. I've come up with different versions, different code for determining the bitness. But if we just come here, and I can come here and we can do a, well, here I can copy it to save ourselves a little bit of time. If we take something like the following, okay, so I'm just going to put it here. So what am I doing? This is code, very basic stripped down code, but it's code for running a PowerShell command via VBA. So we're going to use the create object wscript shell to run whatever our command is. Now in this case, I'm not issuing a direct command, because typically you'd have a dash command or you have a dash file to do something. What I'm doing here is I'm launching PowerShell. I'm saying don't exit, don't close down when you're done what I've asked you to do, because I'm not asking it to do anything. So basically this is just a roundabout way using VBA to launch PowerShell, the console version of PowerShell. So not the ISE where you have a interface, a graphical interface for doing all sorts of stuff, which is really cool, but for what I do for automation. So if we run it, it's going to open PowerShell. Now this is perfect. Now the interesting part here is if I test to see what version of the console it has launched, because PowerShell comes in two flavors. If we come and look in the C drive and you look in the sys32, you will see somewhere down here Windows PowerShell 1. Okay, so you've got the sys32 version, and then you've got the syswow version. And we'll eventually find it, Windows PowerShell. Okay, so they both have the PowerShell exe, they both have the ISE. What's the difference? Well, one is 32-bit driven and one is 64-bit driven. So if I come here and I simply pump in a command to check what is the current running environment, okay, so what we're doing, we tell PowerShell your current environment is it 64-bit process? You'll see it comes back as false. And if I try to run some of these advanced functions, so if we just, for fun, go back to that article, and we just copy that one command, okay? If I try to run it here, it will not work. See, we get an error. And yet, if I run it in the 64-bit environment, it works perfectly. So what we ended up, thanks to some help in a forum and going back and forth and lots of testing, they led me down the path where we eventually identified this was the source of the issue. So by default, it would seem that using this command launches this matching bitness of your Office installation. And that can cause problems. And this has also been an issue, I can't remember when, but I hit a similar problem several years ago trying to do something else. So long story short, I needed a way to determine the OS because I needed to launch PowerShell matching the OS bitness, not my Office bitness, which this does. So this is where this whole idea came from, because originally my article, I believe I had this is the code. What I wanted to do is, since I was getting into this, I wanted to find the most efficient way to determine the OS. And as always, try not to waste time. So did some digging, did some testing, and well, came up with some interesting results. So as you're going to see, if you go and check the article itself, I break it down here into different approaches. So an environment approach, so checking the system environment variables, testing for certain directories that would exist if you're in a 64-bit installation, approaching it from a WScript approach standpoint. PowerShell, as you just saw, can easily do it, and WMI. And WMI also give a second one, just where you can pull out 64-bit, and if you want it textually instead of a true-false. So I did that. I've created a function or several functions to do so. For instance, if we're doing a directory check, well, I used my get attribute, which we found out was an optimized approach for testing the existence of directories. So I have to use my function for testing directories to validate if certain directories exist or not. Environment is very simple. We just use the environ function. PowerShell, as you saw, we can check very quickly WMI. Then I also tested WMI using self-healing object variables. WScript similarly, and then I use the self-healing object variables. And, we can take which one of these, it makes no difference. I always have here usage. So it's very simple in these cases. And we can just come and put in, okay, it returns it's true. Okay, so we know it works. And we can do the same using the environment. And it's true, it works. We could use, let's say, the PS approach. And we get true. WMI. Similarly, WMI using self-healing object variables. And lastly but not least, the WScript approach. We could do that, and we could do using self-healing object variables should we wish to. So as you can see, the results are all the same, but does it make a difference which one I use? That was the next question I had to me. I came up with all these different approaches, code that works, but which one should I be using? And that's where I did the exact same thing I've done recently with my, does a file exist? Does a folder exist? Trying to determine the best approach. So how did I do that? Once again, it's a very similar approach. I put my timer information. I have an article on creating timers. You can go and check it out if you want. DevHut timers. It should come up, no problem. Where is it? Timers. Is that not it? Yes. So there you go, and I explore a couple different approaches. You can review the different approaches, the results, and see, what you want to use, but that's where this comes from. So if you're looking for the code, once again, copy paste, all of this is on my website. And then I just came up with a routine for testing. So what is this routine? Well, normally, let's say we were looking at does a file exist or a folder exist, I did hundreds of iterations. I wanted to average out performance and truly get a better handle on what things were. But realistically, testing for the OS Bitness is not something you should be doing over and over and over in any solution, regardless, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Access, Outlook. It doesn't make a difference. You shouldn't be doing that over and over. If anything, you do that verification initially and you store it to a temp var, to a global var, some mean static variable to keep it in memory. There's no need to run this over and over. So as you can see, instead of doing an iteration, there was no point. You shouldn't be approaching testing the OS Bitness that way. So what I did is I simply tested it once. How does it perform? Now, I've done it multiple times to see if things would move around like they did when I was doing the testing, if a folder existed. But in this case, the results were pretty much static. There was no jumping around of techniques. They were always consistently in the same order of performance, which was, well, what I'd expect, but a little different than I've had recently. So that's all it is. I call my start timer, I execute my function, I stop my timer, I get my elapsed time. And then I pump it into my table of results. So then I have the data in a table that then I can compile, I can do queries on, I can generate graphics on, things like that. But it's very simple. Like I say, I start my timer, I execute the command to find out if it's true or false, 64-bit or not, and I stop my timer immediately. So there's nothing in between affecting it. So it's very simple. You run that guy, and you end up getting a table of results. And if we sort it, let's say by execution times, you can see very quickly which approaches are the beneficial ones to use. You can also see order of magnitude changes in performance. And I know we're talking fractions of seconds and things like that, but you know what? At the end of the day, all of this adds up. A fraction second here, fraction second there, fraction, it all adds up. And it goes from a speedy solution to a sluggish solution. So I know some of people out there are saying, oh, this is a waste, there's no point, just pick one and go with it. Yeah, you can do that, but why would you when I'm giving you here spoon-fed, this is the guy you should use, or followed by going to a directory check. But as you can see clearly, although powerful, PowerShell is slow. And so is WMI, although PowerShell is orders of magnitude slower. So, you use your head here. It's pretty obvious which ones you should use. Now, some people get into, oh, well, environment variables can be spoofed. From a security standpoint, yes. Is someone going to spoof 64-bit variable? I don't see why. I guess anything's possible, but I'm not overly concerned using the environment variable in this context. I won't use it to validate the current username, because then, yes, it can be spoofed. But in this context, I'm not very concerned. If you really are concerned, well, you can always go over to directory check. But there you have it. It's pretty straightforward. And if we graph it quickly, just for visual, you clearly see where PowerShell is in this. And you can clearly see, too, the blips on the radar that WMI have. If we go back to the data very quickly, what you're going to also see here is the self-healing object variables are slower in this context, and it makes perfect sense because they're single calls, okay? If we were doing this over and over and over 100 times, 1,000 times, then you'll see these shows positions are going to move up ahead of the single calls, okay? There's no doubt, and I have done the validation just for the fun of it, but we shouldn't be doing multiple calls of any function to determine the bitness. It should be a one-off at the startup of your database or the first time you need to use it. And that's the results, guys. It's really pretty straightforward. Like I say, environment is the way to go in my personal opinion, but you can always choose to go a different way. So you just scroll up here, and it's this guy here. You just copy paste, and now you have a method to easily identify, are you dealing with a 64-bit OS? And if you come down, I confirm that, and I mentioned optimizing the self-healing object variables because people ask about it, but in this context, not so important. And then we come down to my speed comparison results. As you can see, this guy here, if we do the %diff, was our best case or environment, and then you see how much things jump. And it's surprising mathematically how much the difference, percentage difference truly is. Even though directory is the second, it's still 167% behind in performance, which is staggering. Word of caution, I've seen people have mentioned, well, you can just use conditional compilation and check the Win64. Caution you, no, with emphasizing no. That is not what Win64 represents. Don't ask me why Microsoft called that Win64, that constant Win64, because it leads you down the wrong path. It makes you assume they're talking about Windows. And I don't think they're talking about Windows. Well, I know they're not talking about Windows. What I think they're referring to is the current window. So that means you're running it in the current window context of Excel or the current window context of Access. So you can use that, as I show here, if you want. You can churn that exact same code, just labeling it properly, where you can test, is the app I'm using currently to run 64-bit? So you can use this to test your Office Bitness if you want. So Excel, Word, you get the idea. But it does not represent Microsoft Windows. So this is a big no-no. It will not give you what you're looking for. The other word of caution is Excel has a built-in application.operating system where you're supposed to be able to get information about the operating system, amongst other things, the Bitness. I don't know what to say, but I was all gung-ho. I thought, okay, for the Excel people, this is excellent. A built-in way to do this, a property. And no, stay away at all costs. As I stay here on my Microsoft Windows Home 64-bit, that property was returning Windows 32-bit with no information about the build. So I have no clue what to say. All I can say is this guy does not work reliably. Stay away. So use one of the functions I provide above, or if you know of another one, hey, go for it. And if you do know of other approaches, please drop me a comment. I'd love to add to this and make this article as complete as it can be, and then obviously add some more speed testing to see where it fits into the entire global picture here. But there you have it, the whole information you can possibly want about trying to determine the OS Bitness. It doesn't have to be complex, as you can see. You can achieve that by just using a simple validation of your system variables. And if anyone isn't familiar with what Enviro is doing, if you come here and launch very quickly here, just side, if we open the command prompt and you type in set, you're going to get here a list of all of the current system variables. And what I'm doing here, you see program W634. If you come up here, you'll see there's a system variable called that. Okay, that's its label, that's its name. And that guy only appears if you're on a 64-bit machine. So that's why we're able to simply test for the existence of that variable. So I'm not testing what's returned. I'm just testing, does it exist? Does it return a value? Because on a 32-bit machine, it will not. So therefore, it returns false. And there you go, guys. In a nutshell, testing your bitness of your OS. I hope this was informative. And like I said, please drop me a comment below if you know any other approaches so that I can add them to this article and benefit everyone else out there with your knowledge. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next one.